The city had died long ago, its towers broken, its streets silent, and its skies filled only with drifting smoke from fires that had burned for years without reason. Where once the hum of machines and voices of people had filled the air, now there was only emptiness. In the middle of this wasteland stood a small stall built from broken sheets of metal and bent steel rods, patched together with old wires and whatever scraps could be scavenged. It looked like it should have collapsed at the first touch of wind, yet it stood stubbornly against the decay of the world. And from this fragile place came a smell unlike anything else in the ruined city. It was food, real food, cooked by human hands. Daniel, the last known human cook, worked with steady care over a smoking grill made from a broken engine block. He used an iron pan he had polished so many times it reflected the flames, and he moved as if every small action carried meaning. He was not just cooking. He was keeping something alive. He cut meat into thin slices, let spices fall between his fingers, stirred bubbling broth, and waited until the exact moment when the heat was right. Then he served it on simple clay bowls, each one scratched and chipped, yet clean. At first, no one came. The wasteland was full of wanderers who trusted no one, and the sight of a lone human cooking in the open air seemed strange. But the smell spread far, reaching places where hungry travelers passed. It drew the curious closer, not with force, but with memory of what it meant to eat something warm and alive, something more than the cold taste of gray nutrient paste. One evening, a small group appeared. They were not human. They were alien girls, survivors of their own clans, dressed in travel-worn clothes and carrying weapons on their backs. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim firelight, and their strange features marked them as daughters of a dozen different worlds. They stood at the edge of the stall, whispering among themselves. The smell of the food was heavy in the air, yet they hesitated, unsure whether to trust this last human. Daniel did not speak at first. He kept cooking, his face calm, his hands steady. He poured broth into a bowl, added a piece of meat, and set it carefully on the counter. Then he looked up, his voice quiet but firm. "Hungry?" The aliens glanced at each other. One of them, taller than the rest with silver markings along her arms, stepped forward. She studied the steaming bowl as if it might be a weapon. Slowly, she reached out, lifted it, and brought it close to her face. The steam rose around her eyes. She took a sip. Her body froze. The others leaned closer. Then, without warning, tears slid down her face. She put her hand to her mouth as if trying to stop a cry, but it came anyway, a sound of something breaking open inside her. The others stared, alarmed, until she whispered in a voice that shook, "It feels like home." The others could not resist after that. They moved closer, their weapons forgotten, and soon each had a bowl in their hands. Daniel worked without pause, cooking and serving, never rushing but never stopping. The alien girls ate in silence at first, but soon the silence cracked. One began to laugh softly between mouthfuls. Another leaned back, closing her eyes, whispering that it felt like her childhood even though she had never tasted such food before. Some chewed slowly, as if afraid it might vanish, while others devoured it with desperate hunger. The strange thing was not the taste itself, but what it awakened. None of them had memories of human cooking, yet the food stirred feelings they thought lost: warmth, comfort, the sense of being alive in a world that had nearly forgotten how. They began to talk, first to each other, then to Daniel, asking him how he made such flavor, what spices he used, why it felt like more than just eating. He answered simply, with no pride in his voice. "It is not the food," he said. "It is the care you put into it. The fire listens to your patience. The taste carries your memory." Word spread faster than fire. By the next night, more came. Alien girls from broken caravans, from hidden camps, from ships that no longer flew. They lined up with quiet faces, waiting for their turn. They brought him ingredients from their travels, roots that glowed faintly in the dark, herbs from other planets, fruits that bled silver juice when cut. Daniel did not turn them away. He took everything, tested it, smelled it, and tried to understand how it could blend with the knowledge he carried from a lost Earth. Each night the stall became brighter, not because of the fire alone, but because of the gathering of voices. The sound of laughter and the simple act of sharing a meal. And though no one said it aloud, a strange truth was forming. In a galaxy where humans had almost disappeared, the last cook was building something new. The alien girls did not come only for food. They came because it made them feel something they had almost forgotten to feel: safety, warmth, belonging. They came because the human did not treat them as strangers. He fed them like family, but not everyone saw it that way. In the shadows beyond the firelight, others watched with narrow eyes. Traders who sold tasteless rations, raiders who ruled by hunger, leaders who feared anything that could unite the lost peoples of the wasteland, all began to whisper the same thing. The humans' food was more than food. It was power. And power was something that never went unnoticed in the ruins of the galaxy. The nights grew longer and colder, yet the stall of the last human cook only grew brighter. Every evening the fire was lit, the pan warmed, and the smell of cooking spread through the broken streets like a call to forgotten times. Daniel did not raise banners or call out for customers, but they came anyway, drawn as if the smoke itself whispered their names. At first there were only a few alien girls who dared to eat his food, but soon the line reached far back into the ruins, a waiting trail of quiet figures, their faces pale in the flickering light, their hearts carrying the same hunger that no dry ration or machine-made paste could ever cure. Daniel worked with patience. He did not rush when the line grew longer. His hands moved with steady care, cutting, stirring, and lifting food from the fire. He had learned long ago that food was not only about filling the stomach. It was about rhythm, about silence between movements, about respect for every ingredient, no matter how small. Each time he served a bowl, his eyes met the person who received it. He gave the food not as a transaction, but as a gift, and the alien girls felt it even if they did not know how to describe it. They ate in many different ways. Some ate quickly, their hands shaking, afraid that the taste might disappear. Some ate slowly, savoring each mouthful, as if memorizing every flavor for the rest of their lives. Some sat with tears running down their faces, whispering to themselves in their own languages, words of families long lost, homes burned, or journeys that had no return. The stall became more than a place to eat. It became a place where the heart could speak without fear. Daniel listened as they spoke to him. One girl told him she had been a soldier since she was old enough to walk, that she had forgotten what joy felt like until the soup touched her tongue. Another spoke of a sister she had lost, saying that the roasted bread reminded her of the smell of her sister's hair when they sat by campfires long ago. Another leaned close, saying nothing at all, only eating with silent tears, and Daniel did not ask her story because he understood she was speaking in her own way. Every night more arrived. Some brought him strange ingredients gathered from far-off worlds. A glowing flower that never withered even in the cold. A root that tasted bitter until cooked just right. A spice stone that cracked like glass when struck but melted into golden powder over fire. Daniel tested them all. Sometimes he failed, and the taste was wrong, but he never wasted what was given. He worked again, changing the method, changing the fire, changing the cut until the food sang with the right balance. The alien girls laughed when he cursed softly at his mistakes, and they clapped when he finally smiled and nodded that it was ready. Soon the stall was alive not only with food, but with voices. The alien girls began to share their own stories with one another while waiting in line. They argued, they laughed, They sang songs from their broken worlds. Strangers became companions, companions became friends, and Daniel stood behind his fire, watching how the act of eating together stitched pieces of the galaxy back into one fabric. Yet not everyone was happy. Shadows moved at the edge of the gathering. Traders who sold rations saw their business vanish. Raiders who ruled through hunger watched their control slipping away. Even some leaders of surviving groups whispered that the human cook was dangerous. He was too simple, too quiet, yet his food was undoing the fear and silence that kept the wasteland divided. They began to send spies to watch him. They studied the way the alien girls gathered around him, how they defended his stall from thieves, how they offered him rare goods in return for simple meals. The whisper spread further. The human's food has power. Daniel knew he was being watched. He saw the figures that lingered too long at the edges of the fire. He noticed the way some eyes glared instead of glowed with wonder. But he did not change. He still lit the fire, still cooked with care, still served with patience. When asked why he was not afraid, he answered in his calm voice, "Because food should not be a weapon. If they fear it, then they have already lost what it means to be alive." One evening, the line was longer than ever. The fire cast wide, light over the ruins, and the air was filled with the warm, rich smell of roasted herbs and sizzling broth. Daniel's hands moved tirelessly, serving bowl after bowl, when a girl stepped forward who had never come before. Her eyes were sharp, her voice low, and she carried herself with the posture of a fighter. She sat down with her bowl, stared at the food, and then spoke in a voice that carried across the crowd. "Why do you cook for them, human? You could sell this for riches. You could demand loyalty. You could be a king in this wasteland." The crowd went silent, waiting for his answer. Daniel looked at her, his hand still moving as he stirred the pot. He placed another bowl on the counter. Before replying, his words were simple. "I cook because someone must remember what care tastes like. If food becomes a crown, then it is no longer food. It is chains." The girl did not answer at first. She took a spoonful and placed it in her mouth. For a moment she closed her eyes, and when she opened them, the sharpness had softened. She lowered her head and kept eating quietly. The line moved. Again, voices rising in laughter, and the moment passed. But many who heard his words carried them in their hearts. From that night, the whispers grew stronger. Daniel was no longer only a cook in the ruins. To some, he was hope. To others, he was danger. And in the middle of it all, the alien girls kept flocking to him, guarding him without being asked, protecting the stall as if it were their own home. They did not call him king or leader. They called him cook, and for them, that was higher than any crown. But far away, beyond the light of his fire, plans were being made. And Daniel knew it was only a matter of time before someone tested whether food could truly stand against fear. The nights after that were not the same. The fire still burned, the bowls were still filled, and the smell of food still floated across the broken streets, but there was a new weight in the air. The alien girls still came, lining up with eager faces, their voices carrying laughter and songs. Yet Daniel noticed how often their eyes turned toward the shadows, how their hands rested on the hilts of their weapons, how their smiles faded too quickly when strangers drew near. Something had changed, something unseen but felt by all who gathered at the stall. One evening, when the line stretched deep into the ruins, a silence spread without warning. The laughter stopped, the music of voices cut short, and the crowd parted. As a group of armored figures walked forward. They were tall, their movements sharp, their armor reflecting the firelight with cold gleam. Their faces were hidden beneath dark visors, but their steps carried the weight of authority. No one needed to ask who they were. They were enforcers, sent not by hunger, but by order, carrying the will of powers that feared the cook's fire. More than any blade, they did not line up for food. They stopped before the stall, and the leader spoke in a voice that cut like iron. "Human, your stall gathers too many. Your food spreads too far. You disturb the balance. End this or it will be ended for you." The words fell heavy. The alien girls drew closer to Daniel, their bodies forming a shield between him and the enforcers. Some placed hands on the counter, as if to hold the stall itself in place. Daniel looked at the armored figures, his expression calm, though his hands tightened around the handle of his pan. He did not shout or argue. He only asked one question. "Do you fear the taste of care?" The enforcer did not answer. Instead, the leader raised a hand, pointing at the line of alien girls. "They forget discipline. They forget hunger. They forget who rules these ruins. Your cooking makes them dream, and dreams are dangerous. You are one man human, and one man cannot stand against the laws of the wasteland." Before Daniel could speak again, one of the alien girls stepped forward. She was small, her frame thin, her eyes glowing faintly with silver. She raised her voice so all could hear. "We do not forget discipline. We do not forget hunger. We only remember what it means to live. If one man gives us that memory, then he is not against the wasteland, he is against despair." The enforcers turned their visors toward her, but she did not flinch. Another girl joined her, then another, until the entire line stood firm, their voices rising as one. "We will not let you silence him." The enforcers hesitated. Their orders had been to warn, not yet to strike. The leader lowered his hand, his voice sharp with threat. "This is your last chance, cook. Close this stall before it brings ruin upon you and all who follow." With that, they turned and marched back into the darkness, their armor fading from sight, leaving only the echo of their threat behind. The silence that followed was heavy. The alien girls looked at Daniel, waiting for his answer, waiting for his choice. He set down his pan, wiped his hands with a rag, and spoke in his steady voice. "The fire will not go out. If they wish to bring ruin, let them see what food can build before they try to break it." A cheer rose from the line, strong and fierce, yet beneath it ran a quiet fear. They all knew the enforcers would return, not with words but with weapons. Still, no one left. That night the stall was more crowded than ever, as if every alien girl wanted to show by her presence that she would not be frightened away. They ate not only for hunger, but for defiance, for loyalty, for the belief that something simple could stand against something cruel. Daniel cooked as always, his face calm, though the firelight revealed the weight in his eyes. He did not speak much, but he listened as the girls shared stories of their battles, their homes, their scars. He felt how their voices shook less when they were near the fire, how their laughter came easier, how their hearts leaned on one another as if the stall had become a wall against the cold world outside. He realized then that he was no longer just a cook. His stall was no longer only a place to eat. It was a meeting ground, a bond, a seed of something larger than himself. But seeds invite storms. That night, after the last bowl was served and the fire burned low, Daniel sat alone at the counter. The alien girls had left in small groups, promising to return, promising to guard the place with their lives if needed. The ruins were quiet again, but Daniel could not rest. He thought of the warning, of the armor glinting in the firelight, of the power that feared the taste of food. He knew the enforcers would not stop. They would return, and next time, words would not be their weapon. He stared into the dying embers and whispered to himself, though the ruins were silent, "I am only a cook, but if they come for me, they will learn that food is not weakness. It is memory, and memory cannot be burned." Far away, in the darkness of the wasteland, eyes still watched. Plans were forming. Enemies whispered of recipes to steal, of fire to extinguish. of a human who could not be allowed to change the ruins with nothing but a bowl of soup. The stall still stood. But the storm was drawing near. The night of the attack began like any other, with the glow of fire rising from the broken stall and the smell of roasted herbs spreading into the cold air. The alien girls gathered as always, their voices lifting. With laughter and stories, their eyes shining with the warmth of food and companionship. Daniel worked as he always did, his hands steady as he stirred pots and turned slices of meat over the fire. Yet beneath the surface, there was unease. The warning of the enforcers still lingered like a shadow, and though no one spoke of it openly, every girl carried her weapon close and watched the darkness between the ruins with sharper eyes. The line was long that evening, longer than usual, and Daniel felt the pull of many gazes upon him. Some were filled with hunger, some with hope, but others carried a colder weight. He ignored the tension, serving bowl after bowl, smiling faintly at the gasps of delight, the tears of memory, the laughter that burst without restraint. He had promised himself he would not let fear change the way he cooked, and so he stood firm behind the counter, his fire burning bright. It was when the last bowl of the night was nearly served that the world broke apart. From the far end of the ruins came the crack of explosives, a thunderous sound that shattered the laughter in an instant. The crowd froze as a storm of fire and dust rolled closer, and then from the smoke came the raiders. They poured into the broken street, armored in scraps of metal, armed with blades, rifles, and cruel machines, their voices howling like beasts. The alien girls scrambled to draw weapons, forming a line in front of the stall, but the raiders struck with no hesitation. Daniel's stall shook as a blast tore through one of its patched walls, scattering shards of rusted steel across the ground. His cooking pots clattered, his ingredients spilled, and his fire roared wildly as if trying to resist the assault. Daniel grabbed the heavy pan from the flames and held it in both hands. He was no soldier, no warrior, but he refused to watch silently as his stall was broken apart. The first raider reached him with a jagged blade, swinging wide with the intent to cut him down. But Daniel lifted the pan with sudden force and slammed it into the raider's chest. Clang rang out like a bell, and the raider staggered back, coughing blood through his mask. Another came from the side, but Daniel hurled boiling broth straight into his face, the steam rising with his scream. He fought not with training but with instinct, his every motion born from years of working fire and steel. His tools were his weapons, and though his arms shook, he held firm. All around him, the alien girls battled fiercely. Some had blades that gleamed in the firelight, some fired bursts of plasma from small rifles, some fought with their bare hands, their bodies moving with desperate strength. They fought not for riches, not for power, but for the man who had given them something more precious than survival. They fought for the cook who had made them feel alive. The stall became a fortress of resistance, its firelight burning brighter than the explosions around it. Raiders tried to push through, but the alien girls stood shoulder to shoulder, their voices rising in war cries, their bodies refusing to yield. Daniel struck again and again with his pan, each swing echoing with the sound of defiance. He was cut across the arm, his shoulder bruised by a strike, yet he would not stop. Every time he fell back, another alien girl caught him, pulling him to his feet, shouting at him to stay behind the counter. But he always returned to the front. Through the chaos came a voice, cruel and commanding. A tall raider with armor of black steel strode forward, his weapon glowing with red heat. His mask bore the mark of a skull, and his eyes burned with hatred. He pointed his weapon at Daniel and shouted so all could hear, "The recipes die with you, human. The taste you give them will not outlive this night." The words froze the battle for a moment. The raiders pressed forward, trying to reach Daniel, but the alien girls closed ranks around him, their weapons raised, their bodies forming a wall. One shouted back, her voice strong despite the blood on her lips. "If you want him, you must cut through all of us first." The skull-masked raider sneered and raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Daniel stepped forward. His pen was blackened with soot, his hands burned from the flames, but his voice rang clear above the battle. "You cannot kill memory. Even if I fall, they will remember. And as long as they remember, the fire will not die." With those words he charged, striking his pen against the raider's weapon, the clash sending sparks into the night. The alien! Girls roared and surged with him, their defiance breaking the raider's advance. The battle raged on, fire and steel against blood and shadow, until the night itself seemed to tremble under the struggle. The stall burned. Its walls shattered, its counter broken, yet the fire still burned. The food scattered across the ground. The bowls cracked, the herbs trampled underfoot, yet the smell of cooking still lingered, carried by the smoke. Even in destruction, the stall refused to vanish. When the raiders finally began to fall back, dragging their wounded and cursing their defeat, the alien girls stood panting in the ruins, their bodies bloodied, their weapons scarred. Daniel dropped his pan, his arms shaking, his breath heavy, but his eyes burned with the same fire as the stall. The raiders had not taken him, they had not taken his memory. And though his stall lay in pieces, his spirit remained unbroken. Alien girls gathered around him, some laughing through tears, some pressing their wounds, some lifting him to his feet when his legs faltered. They looked at the wreckage of the stall, at the fire still burning despite the broken walls, and they spoke with one voice. "We will rebuild. We will not let them silence this fire." Daniel looked at them, his chest rising and falling with each heavy breath, and for the first time he allowed himself a tired smile. The stall might be gone, but something greater had been born in the ruins that night. Not food, not recipes, not even memory alone. A bond stronger than hunger, stronger than fear, stronger than the raiders' cruelty. A bond that no fire could burn away. The night ended with smoke rising into the stars, but the fire of the last human cook still lived, carried now in the hearts of those who had fought beside him. And somewhere in the wasteland, his enemies cursed the taste they could not erase. The sun rose over the ruins with a pale and broken light, its warmth faint but steady as it fell upon the wreckage of the stall. Smoke still curled from the charred remains, and the air smelled of ash mixed with the fading scent of herbs and broth. The ground was littered with cracked bowls, shattered pieces of wood, and the prints of many feet that had danced, fought, and bled through the night. The raiders had gone, leaving only silence behind, yet the silence was not empty. It carried the echo of courage, of voices raised together, of a fire that had refused to be extinguished. Daniel sat on a stone near the ruins, his arms wrapped in cloth where burns and cuts had marked him, his face lined with exhaustion. His pen lay beside him, dented and blackened, yet still whole. He stared at the broken pieces of the stall, his heart heavy with the weight of loss. But even in the heaviness he felt a pulse of pride. He had not fallen. His fire had not been stolen. The raiders had broken walls and scattered food, but they had not broken the spirit that lived within the meals he had given. Around him the alien girls began to return. They came one by one, limping, carrying wounds, yet carrying also baskets, bags, and fragments of wood and metal. They did not come to mourn the ruin, they came to rebuild it. Without speaking, they laid their burdens on the ground, herbs and roots, stones for fire pits, scraps for walls, new bowls carried from faraway places. Their hands moved with quiet determination, their eyes burning with the memory of the night before. One of them, her arm bound with cloth, stained from battle, knelt beside Daniel and placed a glowing fruit in his lap. "Cook for us again," she said softly. "The stall is gone, but the fire still waits." Daniel lifted the fruit in his hand, feeling its warmth, and for the first time since the attack he smiled. He rose to his feet, his legs trembling but firm, and spoke to all of them. "If you will build with me, I will cook again. Not only here, but wherever we carry the fire. If the world is broken, then we will make it whole again, one meal at a time." A cheer rose from the crowd, and they set to work. Together they lifted the fallen walls, hammered new frames, cleared the ashes, and built stronger than before. They worked with laughter despite their wounds, passing tools and planks, carrying heavy stones, weaving ropes from fibers gathered in the ruins. Daniel moved among them, giving guidance, lifting where he could, though his strength was worn thin. He felt their energy flow into him, and for the first time he understood that the stall was no longer his alone. It belonged to all of them now, every girl who had fought, every voice that had stood in defiance, every hand that now worked to raise it again. By the time the sun reached its peak, a new stall stood where the old had burned. It was larger, sturdier, its walls lined with colors painted from crushed herbs and glowing minerals. Above it hung a banner sewn from torn cloth, patched together from many worlds, each piece given by one of the girls. It was not perfect, but it was alive, and that was more than perfection could ever give. Daniel lit the fire once more, his hands steady as he placed his blackened pan over the flames. The smell of smoke rose again, but this time it carried not only the memory of destruction, but the promise of renewal. He began to cook with the new ingredients they had brought, blending glowing roots with soft herbs, boiling fruit into sweet broth, searing meat until it sang in the pan. The crowd gathered close, their eyes shining, their voices quiet in reverence, as if watching not a cook, but a maker of miracles. When the first meal was ready, he did not serve one bowl. He filled many, setting them in a circle upon the counter. And he lifted his voice so all could hear. "Last night we fought together. Today we eat together. And tomorrow, when the world tries to break us again, we will rise stronger. This food is not mine alone. It is yours. It is ours." The alien girls took the bowls and ate together, side by side, sharing bites, laughing, crying, holding one another's hands. Their faces glowed not only from the fire, but from the bond that had formed among them. Some leaned against each other. Some sang soft songs, some whispered promises of loyalty. In that circle, there were no strangers, no separate worlds, no broken tribes. There was only one family, united by the taste of care. Daniel watched them with quiet pride. His arms ached, his burns stung, his body begged for rest, yet his spirit felt lighter than it ever had. He had thought himself only a cook, a man clinging to the last memory of a world long gone. But now he saw that his meals were not only memories. They were seeds, and those seeds had taken root in the hearts of many. He had not just fed them. He had given them a reason to stand, to fight, to rebuild. As the feast went on, voices rose in harmony, not planned but born from joy. The ruins that had once echoed with silence now rang with life, and the stall stood as the heart of it all. Even those who had never tasted human food before could feel it in the air. The difference between eating to survive and eating to live. They understood now why the raiders had feared him. Food could bind where weapons could not. Food could awaken strength where fear tried to crush it. When the last bowls were emptied and the fire burned low, the alien girls gathered around Daniel once more. They told him they would stay to guard the stall, that no raider, no enforcer, no enemy would touch it again without facing all of them together. Daniel nodded, his heart swelling with quiet gratitude. He did not speak many words, but those he gave carried weight. "Then this fire will never die." The night returned, but it was not the same night as before. It was brighter, warmer, alive with voices and light. The stall no longer belonged to one human. It belonged to a people who had been lost and now found one another around a simple meal. And in that gathering, the last human cook found what he had never dared to hope for. He was no longer alone. In a galaxy broken by war and silence, where humans had nearly vanished, one cook had done what armies could not. With a pan and a fire, with patience and care, he had turned strangers into family, enemies into defenders, despair into hope. And so in the ruins of the wasteland, beneath the stars that watched with cold and distant light, the last human cook stood with grease on his hands and warmth in his eyes, serving bowls filled not only with food but with the memory of what it meant to be alive. The apocalypse had taken much, but it had not taken everything. As long as the fire burned, as long as the bowls were shared, the galaxy would remember that one human had turned cooking into a weapon stronger than war, a bond no enemy could break. The stall was no longer a place. It was a promise. And promises once tasted could never be forgotten. The end.